The notification came through at 8:30 on a Saturday morning. I was sitting at my desk in my home office on the second floor of our house in Tanglewood, a cup of coffee going warm beside me, reading a title dispute file that had been sitting on my desk since Thursday. Quiet Saturday. The kind of morning that feels like yours. No court dates, no client calls. Just sunlight coming through the shutters and the sound of Bishop, our retriever, doing whatever retrievers do when they think no one is watching. Then my phone lit up. A tag from Britta's public Instagram account. The caption read, "My real partner." The man standing next to my wife in that photograph wasn't me. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. I am not a dramatic man. I am a real estate attorney. I have spent 19 years in rooms where people lie with surgical precision, where the truth hides in paragraph 7 of an easement agreement, where patience and documentation beat anger every single time. I don't slam doors. I don't raise my voice in courtrooms. I don't make scenes at dinner parties in River Oaks while someone's second spouse pretends not to notice. But I had warned her, specifically, clearly. In plain English, 6 days before that notification arrived on my phone, I had said the exact words, "If you post a photo with him, I'm done." She posted the photo, so I got done. This is the story of what happened after that, and I'm going to tell it to you the same way I tell a jury everything, with the evidence in order, starting from the beginning. Because the beginning matters, and the end is going to surprise you. Before I get into it, if you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button right now. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Like the video while you're at it. It costs you nothing, and it means everything. Now, let's go back to where this really started. Britta and I had been married for 11 years when all of this happened. We met at a fundraiser at the Houstonian Hotel in 2013. She was 31, working in corporate communications for an energy company in the Galleria district. She had this particular quality when she listened to you, a stillness, a focus. Like every word out of your mouth was the most interesting thing she'd heard all week. I found out later that's a technique they actually teach in PR school. But at the time, at that fundraiser with the string quartet and the open bar in the city of Houston glittering outside the windows, I thought I had found someone extraordinary. And for a long time I had. We built a real life together. I made partner at Whitmore & Hale on Post Oak Boulevard in 2016, after a decade of doing the kind of groundwork that doesn't get praised out loud, but eventually gets remembered. Britta climbed to Senior Director of Communications at Corval Energy, a mid-size oil and gas firm, headquartered out in the Energy Corridor on I-10 West. We had the house in Tanglewood, the one with the ancient live oak in the front yard that drops leaves on the driveway from October through February, and somehow adds $80,000 to the property value just by existing. We had Bishop, who shed on every piece of furniture we owned and showed absolutely no remorse about it. We had date nights at Brennan's on Smith Street and summer trips to the Pacific Northwest, and the kind of routine that felt, when you were inside it, like permanence. The cracks, when I look back at them now, were there before Sutton ever entered the picture. Britta had changed over the previous 2 years in the specific way that people change when they've decided something privately but haven't said it out loud yet. The distance showed up in small things first. Longer hours that didn't quite match her workload. A phone that traveled with her everywhere, including into the bathroom where it had never gone before. Answers to questions that were technically complete but somehow hollow in the middle, like a wall that sounds fine until you knock on it and realize nothing's behind the drywall. I filed all of it under stress. Corval had been through a restructuring. Her boss Carmichael had expanded her department and doubled her responsibilities. I told myself the marriage wasn't in trouble. I told myself we were just busy. I should have paid closer attention to the things I was choosing not to see. Sutton Waverly had joined Corval Energy's marketing division about 8 months before all of this unfolded. He was 38, recently divorced, the kind of man who introduces himself at work happy hours by mentioning his half-marathon time before he mentions his job title. He and Britta had been assigned to the same rebranding project that ran from January through late spring. I heard his name 3 or 4 times over the course of those months, in the way you hear about people who exist on the periphery of your spouse's work life. Just a name in a story about a difficult meeting. Just a coworker. I didn't think much of it. Until May, when my law partner Ezra Callahan pulled me aside during a firm reception at the bar inside the Four Seasons downtown, and said something I did not want to hear. "Nolan." He had his lawyer voice on. Not his friend voice. His lawyer voice, which in 9 years of partnership I had learned to take seriously. I saw Britta last Tuesday at Tiny Boxwoods on West Alabama. I turned to look at him. She was with a man I didn't recognize. He paused for a moment. They were sitting close. I almost walked over to say hello, but something stopped me. The body language. I don't know. It just felt wrong. He looked at me straight. I thought you should know. Ezra had been my law partner for 9 years. Before that, we'd been associates together at Whitmore and Hale starting in the same class back in 2006. He had 3 kids and a wife named Patricia, and he was not a man who floated impressions when he meant facts. I nodded. I thanked him. I drove home. I did not say anything to Britta that night. I needed to think first. That is how I'm built, professionally and personally. Think before you speak. Think before you act. Know the full case before you walk into the room. The attorney who confronts a witness with incomplete information does not get the truth. He gets a story. And I did not want a story. I wanted the truth. 2 days later, I hired a private investigator named Todd Graves out of his office on Westheimer Road near the Montrose area. Todd was a former Harris County Sheriff's detective who had transitioned into domestic and corporate investigations about 7 years prior. He was methodical, he was quiet, and he had the particular professional quality I valued above all others. He did not editorialize. He brought me facts and he let me draw my own conclusions. He came back with a file 11 days later. Britta and Sutton Waverly had been meeting outside the office since at least late February. Lunch at Common Bond in Midtown on a Tuesday when she told me she was eating at her desk. Drinks at Mongoose vs. Cobra on Washington Avenue. On a weeknight, I believe she was at a work dinner with a client. A walk along Buffalo Bayou Park on a Sunday morning, I was certain she had been at her spinning class over on West Gray. The emotional affair, at minimum, had been running for 4 months. Whether it had crossed into something physical, Todd could not confirm from what he had documented. But the frequency, the secrecy, the geography of it. I didn't need a specific photograph to understand what was happening between them. I had been reading between the lines of documents for 19 years. I knew what omissions looked like. I knew what the shape of deception looked like, even when the center of it wasn't visible. I closed Todd's file. I sat in my private office on the 14th floor of Whitmore, and Hale with the downtown Houston skyline spread out in front of me, and let the silence organize everything the way it always does. I did not call Britta. I did not call a therapist. I did not call her mother, who I had always genuinely liked and who deserved better than to be dragged into this. I told one person. Ezra. That was it. Then, over the next 3 weeks, I did what I do. I moved a portion of my personal assets into accounts I had held individually before our marriage, all of which were already documented as separate property under Texas community property law. But I made the paper trail airtight. Not because I was planning to be unfair, because in a divorce proceeding, the difference between airtight documentation and sloppy documentation is often the difference between what is actually yours and what you end up arguing about for 14 months in front of a judge. I had watched that happen to enough clients to know I was not going to be one of them. Then I met once with a divorce attorney named Sylvia Renner, whose office was in River Oaks on a quiet street off San Felipe. Sylvia had come recommended by a colleague at a competing firm, which in the legal world is the highest possible endorsement. She was efficient, she was precise, and she had the calm of a woman who had handled high-asset Texas divorces for 20 years without once losing her composure in a deposition. We met for 90 minutes. She explained the process. I explained the situation. We did not file anything. We simply made sure I was ready for when the time came. Then I came home one evening in late June, and I sat down across from Britta at the kitchen table in Tanglewood. No photographs from Todd's file spread out in front of her. No accusation in my voice. No performance of betrayed husband. No table slamming. No anything that would put her on the defensive before I had said what I actually needed to say. Just the two of us at the table where we had eaten breakfast for 11 years, with Bishop asleep under Britta's chair and the neighbor's lawnmower running somewhere in the quiet outside. I know about Sutton, I said. I set my coffee mug down on the table and did not pick it up again. I know how long. I know what it looks like. And I'm not going to pretend I don't know, and I'm not going to ask you to perform a denial for me. I've seen enough of those to know what they look like. She didn't speak. She went very still. The particular stillness of a person caught between the impulse to run and the knowledge that there is nowhere left to go. I need you to make a real decision, I said. This marriage, or whatever this is, I can't repair something you won't even acknowledge is broken. But I need you to know exactly where I stand, and I need you to hear one thing very clearly. I looked at her directly. If you put this relationship on public display, if you post a photograph with him, if you caption it, if you make this something the people in our lives can see and comment on, I'm done, we're done. No conversation, no second chance, no process. Done. Do you understand what I'm telling you? She cried. She apologized. She said it wasn't what it looked like, and that she cared about this marriage, and that she would handle it. I believed enough of it to stay in the house. I did not believe enough of it to stop watching. July passed. August arrived. Things appeared different on the surface. Britta was home on time most evenings. She stopped mentioning Sutton's name in conversation entirely, which is its own kind of tell. She deleted her Instagram account and started a new one she kept private. She cooked dinner twice a week, which she hadn't done in over a year. I watched all of it with the patience of a man who reads contracts for a living. Something was still wrong underneath the performance. I could feel it the way you feel a structural issue in a property before the inspection report confirms it. A. Vibration in the floor that has no visible source. The foundation, just slightly off. Then came the trip. Corval Energy's annual leadership retreat was scheduled for the last week of September. 4 days in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Britta mentioned it in August in passing, the way she mentioned every other work obligation, matter-of-factly, with dates and logistics, no particular weight given to it. I asked one question. Will Sutton be there? She paused. Half a second, maybe less. The kind of pause you don't notice unless you're trained to notice everything. He's not senior leadership, she said. He's not invited. I let it go. I appeared to let it go. Todd Graves confirmed on the first night of that retreat that Sutton Waverly had checked into the Hotel St. Francis on Don Gaspar Avenue in Santa Fe, 2 floors above Britta's room. I sat with that for a long time that night. Bishop was asleep at the foot of the bed on the side that had been Britta's. I turned the information over the way you turn a contract page, looking for the clause that changes everything. I thought about June. I thought about the specific words I had said at that kitchen table. I thought about whether I had left any room for misunderstanding in what I had told her. I had not. I am a lawyer. Precision is the job. I set the information down in the part of my mind reserved for evidence that has not yet been needed, and I waited. Day 2 of the retreat was a Saturday. At 11:47 in the morning, my phone lit up with a notification from Britta's Instagram. She had switched the account back to public sometime that morning, and there was the photo. Britta on a hotel balcony with the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in the background. Sutton Waverly beside her, his arm resting around her shoulders, her head tilted toward him with the particular ease of 2 people who had stopped bothering to pretend they were strangers. The caption, "My real partner. Public. Searchable." 14 mutual friends had already liked it. I read the caption twice. I set the phone face down on my desk. I sat in my home office for 9 full minutes. I know because I counted them the way I count the seconds of silence after a witness answers a difficult question in deposition, watching for what fills the quiet. Bishop came in partway through, looked at me once, and settled on the rug beside the desk. Good dog. He always knew when to stop asking questions. Then I picked the phone back up. Not to call Britta, not to post anything in response, not to text Sutton Waverly a single word that I would later have to account for in a courtroom. I called Sylvia Renner. Sylvia, it's Nolan. It's time to file. 4 words back. I'll start the paperwork. Then I called Ezra. She posted it publicly. He knew exactly what that meant. I didn't need to reconstruct the context. There was a pause on his end. What do you need? Nothing yet. I just wanted the timeline. On record with someone I trust. I hung up. I went downstairs. I fed Bishop. I made dinner for one. And I let the silence do what silence does best. It organized everything. Now here is what Britta did not know. What Sutton Waverly did not know. What the people who liked that Instagram post and left hard-eye comments underneath it did not know. Sutton Waverly had a conflict of interest problem. 3 months earlier, in the early summer, I had been retained on a commercial real estate transaction in Houston's Uptown Corridor, near the Galleria. A developer named Carter Pressman was acquiring a parcel of mixed-use commercial property in the Post Oak area for a mid-scale retail and office development. Standard work for our firm. Title review. Contract negotiation. Coordination with the city on a conditional use agreement, and eventual closing. In the course of due diligence, which at Whitmore and Hale means reading every document in the file, not skimming them, I reviewed the full investor disclosure package for Carter Pressman's development group. Standard procedure. Every investor, every equity stake, every material interest. Buried on page 11 of the disclosure, in a section that a careless attorney would have processed in 30 seconds and moved past, was a name I recognized. Sutton Waverly. A minor equity stake in Pressman's development group, held through a personal investment vehicle registered in Texas. I noted it, filed it, continued reviewing. But here is the thing about being a real estate attorney in a major metropolitan market for 19 years. You know the ecosystem. You know the projects, the campaigns, the political and economic forces that move property values in specific corridors. And I knew that Corval Energy, Sutton's employer, had recently partnered with a city revitalization initiative, a promotional and communications campaign for the commercial district that encompassed exactly the uptown corridor where Carter Pressman was acquiring property. Sutton had been part of the team producing and distributing those promotional materials. Materials that, if the revitalization campaign succeeded, would increase foot traffic, attract retail tenants, and drive up the property values of the exact parcels his investment group was trying to acquire. He had not disclosed his personal equity stake in the development group to Corval Energy, not to Carmichael, not to the compliance department, not in any of the internal documentation I had reviewed as part of the transaction. He was positioned to profit from information and effort generated by his employer, and he had told nobody. I had written a memo on this in July, a detailed, documented memo outlining the potential conflict, its scope, and its materiality to the transaction. I had placed it in the client file. I had waited because the transaction was still in due diligence, because Carter Pressman did not yet have all the information he needed to make a decision about it, and because I do not act on incomplete files. On the Sunday morning after the Instagram post appeared, I pulled that memo out of the client file. Then I called Carter Pressman. Carter, Nolan Hale, I need to walk you through something in the Uptown file. It concerns one of your investors and a potential conflict of interest situation that should have been documented before your group moved into the acquisition phase. He did not like what I described. Nobody likes finding out that a member of their investment group has been operating with an undisclosed parallel financial interest. It exposes the deal, the investors, and potentially the developer himself to liability. Carter Pressman was a careful businessman. He understood immediately what the exposure meant. The call lasted 41 minutes. At the end of it, Carter Pressman formally instructed me to document the conflict in writing, notify the full investor group, and send a formal letter to Corval Energy's legal department identifying the nature and scope of the undisclosed interest held by their employee in a project connected to work performed in his professional capacity. That letter took me 3 hours to draft on Sunday afternoon. Precise, professional, factual to the word. Not one syllable of personal circumstance in it. Not a trace of the husband who had sat in his home office the day before counting minutes in silence. Just the documentation of a material omission by a Corval Energy employee in a position of professional influence, addressed to the General Counsel and Corporate Compliance inbox, with a complete paper trail attached. I sent it Monday morning at 8:14 a.m., certified mail and email simultaneously. Confirmation requested on both. Britta flew back to Houston from Santa Fe on Monday afternoon. Her flight landed at George Bush Intercontinental at 3:52 p.m. I know this because I was watching the flight tracker on my phone while I sat in a conference room, on the 14th floor finishing a closing package for a warehouse conversion in the East End. The kind of work that requires full attention. I gave it half. She texted from the car on her way home. Just landed, long flight, see you tonight. I replied, drive safe. She walked in the front door at 5:30. Bishop was at her feet within 4 seconds, tail going, the way he always is when someone he loves comes back into the house. She dropped her carry-on by the stairs, looked around the kitchen with the expression of someone who had convinced themselves the scene they were walking into would be manageable. She said, I missed this house. I was sitting at the kitchen table. There was a glass of water in front of me, and the divorce papers Sylvia had prepared in a manila envelope in the center of the table. I slid the envelope across to her. Britta looked at the envelope, then at me, then back at the envelope. Nolan, I warned you. I kept my voice level, not cold, not theatrical. The same voice I use in depositions when I need a witness to understand that the document in front of them is real and it is not going away. I told you exactly what would happen. One condition. One. And you posted it publicly. With a caption. She opened her mouth. Don't tell me it was impulsive. You switched the account back to public that morning specifically. You knew exactly who would see it. You knew what the caption meant. She sat down slowly. Her face had the color of someone who had rehearsed a different version of this conversation and was discovering the script no longer applied. I love you, she said. And I think, sitting there across the table from her, that she meant it, or the version of it she was capable of in that moment. I know, I said. That's what took me a while to work through. You can love someone and still do this. They're not mutually exclusive. You can mean it and still blow it up. I stood up, buttoned my jacket. Sylvia Renner will reach out to you this week. She is fair and she is thorough. If you are honest with her, this process goes smoothly and professionally. If you make it difficult, it gets more expensive for everyone, and in the end the documentation still wins. That is always how it ends. I picked up Bishop's leash from the hook by the door. He looked up at me with the absolute uncomplicated loyalty that only dogs manage consistently. I'm staying at Ezra's for the next few weeks while the lawyers work. I'll come back tomorrow morning for his food. I looked at Britta one more time, not with anger, not with triumph, with the particular clarity you feel when a long case is finally going the way the evidence always said it should. Then I walked out. Here is what happened Tuesday morning. The part that Britta could not have predicted, and I want to be honest about this because it matters. I did not arrange what happened Tuesday. I did not manufacture it or time it for maximum damage. I set a legal process in motion on Sunday that followed standard professional obligations. The rest was the natural consequence of a man who had created his own problem and assumed no one was paying close enough attention. Britta arrived at Corval Energy's offices in the Energy Corridor at 8:30 a.m. Normal Tuesday. She had probably spent all of Monday night trying to understand what was happening, trying to reach Sutton, trying to calculate how to manage a divorce she hadn't expected to be real yet. At 9:07 a.m., Corval Energy's general counsel received the compliance letter I had sent. The formal conflict of interest notification, the investor disclosure page with Sutton's name on it, the documentation of the promotional campaign connection, the material omission, all of it. By 9:45, it had traveled up to Brendan Carmichael, Senior Vice President of Communications and Marketing, Sutton's department head, Britta's boss. At 10:12 a.m., Carmichael walked into Britta's office and shut the door behind him. I know what happened in that office because Britta called me that afternoon from the parking garage at Corval, her voice pressed down tight and controlled in the way people get when they are trying not to come apart in a public space. Carmichael came in screaming, she said. An attorney from some real estate firm sent a formal letter to the general counsel, a conflict of interest notification involving Sutton, an investment he never disclosed, connected to a campaign our department ran. A pause. The sound of the parking garage behind her. Nolan, what did you do? I let the question sit for a moment. The kind of pause that isn't hesitation. It's precision. I documented a material conflict of interest that I discovered in the course of my professional duties, I said. That is what I am required to do under my professional obligations and my duty to my client. That is what I did. He's going to lose his job. That is a possible outcome. It depends on what Corval's internal review determines. I don't control that process. You've been sitting on this. You knew and you waited until... I didn't sit on it. It was in my client file since July. The transaction moved into its final phase. I notified my client. The formal letter followed standard professional process. Every step of that is documented. Silence on her end. The parking garage. A car door somewhere in the background. Britta. I kept my voice even. I told you 6 days before that trip what the line was. Not as a threat. As the truth about what I would do. You heard the words. You went to Santa Fe, and you chose. She didn't answer that. The divorce papers are real, I said. Sylvia is expecting your call. I think you should make it soon. I hung up. Sutton Waverly was placed on administrative leave by Corval Energy on Thursday of that week, pending the outcome of an internal compliance review. The review expanded over the following 2 weeks in the way that, Compliance reviews tend to expand when they start pulling a thread, because threads are connected to other threads, and when a compliance department gets serious, they don't stop at the first thing they find. Sutton had used his corporate email on 2 separate occasions to correspond with Carter Pressman's investment group in a manner Corval's legal team determined constituted use of company resources for personal financial benefit. That was a terminable offense under his employment contract, independent of the conflict issue. He was let go 4 weeks after the photo went public. I want to tell you honestly what I felt when Ezra texted me to confirm that, because I've thought about it enough times to have a real answer. It was not satisfaction. It was not triumph. It was something closer to the feeling you get when a very long case finally closes. When the last document is signed, the file gets an end date, and you can stop carrying it. Not victory, just the particular quiet that comes when things have reached their natural conclusion. The divorce moved through Sylvia's hands with the efficiency I had expected of her. Texas is a community property state. The marital estate was divided with precision. The Tanglewood house sold in late November. 11 days on the market. It was a good street, well-maintained, and the live oak in the front yard did exactly what live oaks on good streets in Houston always do. Britta received her fair share of everything. I want to say that clearly and without hedging. I did not try to take what wasn't mine. Sylvia was accurate, not punitive. That was a deliberate choice I made because punitive divorces are satisfying for about 6 weeks, and then they are just expensive and exhausting, and they make you a worse version of yourself in the process. I had seen enough of them from the outside to know I didn't want one from the inside. I was in Sylvia's conference room off West Gray on a gray afternoon in December when the final papers were signed. Britta sat across the table with her attorney. She looked tired, not broken. She was not a woman who broke easily, and I respected that even then, but genuinely, deeply tired. The tired of someone who had been carrying a decision for a long time before finally putting it down. We didn't exchange speeches. There was nothing left to perform. When everything was signed and the attorneys were finishing their paperwork, Britta looked up at me once across the table. "I'm sorry," she said. "Small, plain, no performance in it at all." "I know," I said. We walked out separately into a December afternoon that smelled like the Gulf was thinking about bringing weather. I've thought a lot about what the hardest part of all of it actually was. Not the photograph, though that's what started the clock. Not the legal process. Not the house sale, or the dinners eaten alone in that rental apartment on Kirby Drive near the medical center, while Bishop stared at me from across the kitchen with the patient optimism of a dog who believes something edible is always about to happen. The hardest part was the inventory. Going back through 11 years of a marriage and deciding piece by piece what was real. Here's what I concluded, and I want to be honest about this because I think it's the truth. Most of it was real. That is the complicated part of the whole story. Britta didn't spend 11 years performing. She wasn't calculating from the beginning. She was a person who changed in ways she didn't fully understand, who made choices that destroyed something genuine, who finally handled it the worst possible way, publicly, with a caption and a heart emoji, in a way she knew would force a conclusion she couldn't make herself. That's not the same as everything being a lie. The lie was specific. The love wasn't. Holding on to that distinction didn't make the divorce easier or the house feel less empty when I drove past the Tanglewood street in January. But it made the aftermath cleaner, because I wasn't grieving a deception that had run the length of the marriage. I was grieving something that had been real and then wasn't. Something that had eroded slowly in ways neither of us addressed until it was too late to address them. I've sat with that long enough to stop flinching at it. Ezra stopped by my office in January with a bottle of Woodford Reserve and the transparent agenda of a man who wants to check on his friend without making it an event. "How are you?" he asked, setting the bottle on my desk. "Ask me something harder," I said. He laughed, poured 2 glasses, set one in front of me without asking. "You know what I keep coming back to?" he said after a while. "Tell me." "That conversation in June, at the kitchen table, where you told her exactly what the line was." "Yeah." Most people would have gone in with everything Todd had, laid it all out, confronted her with the photographs, the timeline, made it messy and emotional and loud. He turned his glass in his hand. "You didn't. You just told her the truth and gave her a real choice." "That's what you do when you want someone to actually hear you," I said. "You give them the position clearly and give them an opportunity to respond. If they choose wrong, they live with it. She chose wrong. She did." He was quiet for a moment. The offices outside my window were going dark. the last of the day filing out toward the elevators and the parking garage on the street below. The caption, Ezra said, "My real partner." Yeah, she knew exactly who would see that. She did. So why do it? Why not just end the marriage directly? Come home and say it's over? I thought about that for a while before I answered. Not because I was stalling, but because I had been thinking about it seriously for 2 months and I wanted to give him an accurate answer. I think, I said finally, she needed it to be decided for her. She had been living in the middle for months. She couldn't find the door out on her own, so she handed the detonator to me and let me be the one to end it. I picked up my glass. That doesn't excuse the caption. She could have knocked on the bedroom door and said the marriage was over. She could have called Sylvia herself. She didn't need a public post with a heart emoji. I paused, but I think that's the real reason it happened. She chose the hard way out because she couldn't find the straight one. Ezra nodded slowly. Didn't say anything. Some things you don't need to respond to. We drank. The Houston skyline did what it does in January, threatened to get cold, reconsidered, and went back to 58 degrees and overcast. "Are you okay?" he asked eventually. "Getting there," I said, which is as honest as I can be tonight. I drove home on Westheimer. Bishop was at the apartment door when I got there, the way he always is, with the absolute certainty that whatever the day had contained, his presence made it all right again. He's not wrong about that, actually. The year-end dinner at Whitmore and Hale happened 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized. River Oaks Country Club. The usual gathering. Partners, senior associates, a few major clients. The kind of event I had attended for 15 consecutive years without once noticing it clearly. This year, I noticed everything. The way a room sounds different when you are not tracking it for a face that used to anchor your evening. The particular freedom of a conversation that belongs entirely to you. No image to manage, no story to coordinate, no other half of a narrative to stay consistent with. I talked to a client about a mixed-use development she was bringing to the Heights neighborhood. Good project. Real bones, strong location. The kind of transactional work I went to law school to do and still find genuinely interesting 19 years in. I drove home at 10, parked on Kirby, sat in the car. For a minute before going in. The way I always have, just breathing. Just letting the quiet settle everything back into order. Then I went inside, fed Bishop, put the bourbon away. I had a 7 a.m. call with a title company about an East End warehouse conversion and a closing Thursday in the Galleria that had been 9 months in the making. Good work, honest work, work I was proud of. Some nights that is enough. Here is what I want you to take from this story. Not revenge, because when I look back on it clearly, that is not what it was. What I did professionally was exactly what I would have done in any other transaction for any other client on any other Tuesday. A conflict of interest existed. It was material. It was documented. Standard process followed. The timing was what it was. What I want you to take is something simpler. When someone tells you clearly what the line is, they are not making a speech. They are giving you a real piece of information about who they are and what they will do. Most people, when they hear that kind of truth, file it away as emotion, as posturing, as the kind of thing people say but don't mean. I meant it. And I think on some level Britta knew I meant it. She posted the photo anyway. And that is the part that still puzzles me, honestly. Not the betrayal, not the affair, not the divorce. Those things have explanations, complicated and human as they are. What still puzzles me is the caption. My real partner. Public. Searchable. With a heart. When she knew. When she had been told plainly. When she understood the case I would make and the process I would follow. I've come to think Ezra was right. She needed it decided. She needed someone else to close the door because she could not close it herself. And I was the person she trusted, in whatever complicated, exhausted end-of-a-marriage way, to actually follow through. I don't say that to be generous to her. I say it because I think it's accurate. And accuracy matters more to me than comfort. 11 years was real. The ending was real. And the morning I woke up in an apartment on Kirby Drive with a clear conscience, a 70-pound retriever standing on my legs, and a full day of honest work in front of me. That was real too. Sometimes the end is also the beginning. You just have to be willing to let it be both. My personal take. You know, what really gets me about Nolan is how calm he stayed. He didn't yell, he didn't make a scene, he just gave his wife a clear choice. And when she chose to post that photo with that specific caption, she wasn't just being messy. She was basically handed him the delete button for their marriage. A lot of people will call what he did to Sutton revenge, but honestly, it was just the truth catching up. Sutton played a dirty game at work, and Nolan just stopped protecting him. The biggest lesson here is that when a quiet person tells you this is my limit, you should believe them the first time. Nolan lost his home, but he kept his head held high. And sometimes, walking away with your dignity and a loyal dog is the biggest win you can get. It's not about winning a fight, it's about finally being done with the lies.